Hi, welcome to Physionic, where we learn the body from the macro to the micro. If that's something you think you'd be interested in, then consider subscribing. In this content, we're going to be looking at the relationship between gum health, gum disease more specifically, and its impact on heart health or endothelial function, as well as inflammation.
Learn Your Body, a science-based education.
Now, this research comes out of a paper that I dissected, and I will have that paper linked for you, as well as my notes, as well as any amendments that might follow this content's publication. So the data, before we get actually into the data, periodontitis is, and hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly, I'm certainly not a dental student, but that is a gum issue, gum disease, a serious gum disease. So if you've heard of gingivitis, this would be a more extreme version of gingivitis that can lead to the loss of your jaw. Actually, you can lose a lot of different structures throughout your mouth. So they wanted to look at, these researchers I should say, wanted to look at how individuals that have periodontitis, how that impacts their endothelial health. And not only that, more specifically, looking at how different treatments for alleviating this gum disease leads to better outcomes, or does it lead to better outcomes? Well, they had 120 participants that were enrolled. They had 61 in one group and 59 in the other group, and they had two groups. So they had a control group, which isn't your typical control because it's unethical for researchers to give no treatment whatsoever. So these individuals in the control group went through a light dental treatment, while the individuals that were in the actual treatment group were given a more extensive, intensive gum and tooth treatment. So they only underwent one treatment, and then the researchers kind of followed their progression over a 6-month period at several different time points. So they got baseline markers, and then they followed them, let's say, a week later, a month later, 3 months later, and 6 months later, something along those lines. Now, the only qualification for this study was that you had to have periodontitis, and that was actually assessed by somebody that was independent of the research, so they didn't know which condition everybody was going to be in, so that there was some sort of blinding that occurred, meaning that then the researchers, or specifically this one individual, would not know which situation or which group each of the participants that were being assessed were going to be put in. So this one individual did all 120 participants to determine, hey, yes, you've got severe periodontitis and you would get some sort of benefit from this particular treatment. Either way, they could only say, yes, you have periodontitis, or you don't have periodontitis, and therefore you do not belong in this study. Now, then they were randomly assigned to each one of the groups once they were assessed for gum disease. And in terms of the actual measurements, well, they did endothelial vasodilation assays to figure out how easily the endothelial nature of their vessels would be. So the greater dilation, the better outcome typically, because that means that your vessels are more pliable, that they will open and close more readily, as opposed to a person who doesn't have that quite the same opening level. And they measured a series of different blood markers at different time points to assess different inflammatory markers, as well as some plaque markers that I'll be going over as well. Then they were tested for their baseline markers to determine if there were any actual blood marker differences or age differences or things of that nature between the two groups, because that could present some serious confounding variables to the study. So that said, they found that there were no differences between the groups, which is really, really encouraging, because then whatever treatment they give, most likely that's going to cause the differences that they might see 6 months down the road or 2 months down the road. Now, as they went along, they assessed the severity of the gum disease, and they found that in both groups, in the light treatment, otherwise known as the control group, and the intensive treatment, which is the actual treatment group, they did find that the gum disease did improve. So that adds to kind of the ethical nature of it. However, with the intensive group, they did see better results in a variety of different factors that I'll point out on the screen. Next, they wanted to look at blood vessel dilation, which is kind of the main outcome that they're interested in, the endothelial function. And they found that there's actually a decrease in the endothelial function in the intensive group after a single day. And most likely what you're going to see here is a trend with the inflammatory markers, which I'll be showing you in just a second, that with this intensive treatment, there's a lot of bleeding that occurs. You're going to have a lot of inflammation in that area, and that actually decreased the vasodilation, that actually decreased the endothelial function. However, after 6 months, because of this healing process that occurred, because they had better treatment, they saw better vasodilation, meaning that their cardiovascular system was in a better, more primed situation, in a healthier situation because of the more intense treatment. And finally, looking at some of the inflammatory markers as well as some of the plaque markers, you can see things like plasminogen activator inhibitor and E-selectins and a series of other immune markers seem to kind of follow a similar trend. So they tend to get worse for the intensive group after that initial day, because again, that's a lot of trauma that's occurring to the gum line, and that's going to cause a lot of infiltration of the immune cells and kind of immune cytokines and chemokines and all kinds of different communication proteins to recruit a lot of cells to that area. So in that regard, in the short term, it seems to be a bad thing to undergo this intensive treatment. However, in the long term, their immune markers, everything got better than the control group over a 6-month period. So in the acute, it seems to be bad, but in the chronic, it seems to be good. Even after 7 days or even like a month or 2 months, it seems that it has a beneficial impact in terms of immunity. So in those regards, you should certainly be happier to have that intensive treatment. Now, I will mention for something like Van Willebrand's factor or interleukin-6, you do not see a improvement after that initial like month or so. They're roughly comparable when it comes to the control group versus the intensive group, or intensive treatment group, excuse me. But still, overall, in some of these other factors, you still see improvements, which is nice to see. And at least you don't see any sort of decrements. So overall, what does this tell us? Well, it tells us that, well, getting your teeth cleaned and making sure that your gum line is in a healthy state, is undergoing the regular cleaning that it needs to, leads to improvements in your endothelial health. So that's going to help with your cardiovascular health, your heart health, and your vasculature throughout your entire body, throughout your periphery. But also beyond that, it seems to have an impact on our immune function. So it decreases kind of that systemic inflammation after that initial spike in the inflammation that occurs after that first day or that first week of getting that intensive treatment. So overall, what should you take away from this? Well, go to your dentist. Make sure that you're getting regular appointments and making sure that based off of this data that you stick to your appointments and that you clean your teeth and that you just generally take care of your oral health. Okay, well, with that said, hopefully you found this informative, and with all of that out of the way, I hope I have the absolute pleasure of speaking with you in the next one. Have a good one, guys. Bye.